He abandoned me in a wheelchair, unaware of my $500 million inheritance. Sarah stood at the busy bus stop, her feet aching from standing all day. She wiped the sweat off her brow as the sun beat down on her, but she kept smiling. Her small stall was filled with fresh fruit, carefully arranged to attract customers. She had done everything she could to make sure her family didn't go hungry, but it felt like the more she worked, the farther she got from the dreams she had once held. At 34, Sarah was tired. The weight of responsibility rested heavily on her shoulders. She was the one who woke up before dawn every day, hustling to make sure her children had food on the table. Her husband, Felix, sat at home. He had been out of work for a while, but he had never really been the type to help out at home. He was a man of pride, and his ego never let him accept help, even when it was clear that they were struggling. Sarah had begged him more times than she could count to help her with the stall. "Felix, you know I can't do it all alone. You're educated, you can help me manage the business while I focus on the selling. Please don't make me carry this alone," she would plead. But Felix always found a way to turn her down. He would sit on the couch, watching TV or playing games on his phone, while Sarah worked her fingers to the bone. He was a man who had been given opportunities, but he wasted them all. He had a degree, but no ambition. He spent the little money he got on himself, buying things he didn't need and spending time with other women, while Sarah barely had enough to feed their 2 children. She had always believed in him, hoping he would one day see the value in working together for the sake of their family, but instead, he pushed her further away with every passing day. "I didn't marry you to become your servant, Sarah," Felix would say, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm not here to sell fruit on the street. That's your thing, not mine." He would laugh as though it was a joke, but Sarah could see the contempt in his eyes. His words hurt, but what hurt more was that he didn't seem to care about how much she was sacrificing. One evening, Sarah came back from the market with a bag of fruits for the next day. She had bought them with the little money she had left after paying the rent. Her legs were sore, her back aching, and her heart heavy with the burden of providing for her family alone. As she walked home, lost in thought, she heard the screeching of car brakes. Before she could react, a car came speeding toward her, the brakes failing, and the next thing she knew, she was lying on the ground, her body crushed beneath the weight of the vehicle. Pain shot through her legs, and she screamed in agony, but no one came to help. The driver panicked, jumped out of the car, but all Sarah could see was his face blurred by the tears streaming down her eyes. She couldn't feel her legs anymore. They were numb, cold, and heavy. The pain in her body was nothing compared to the shock of what had just happened. It all happened so quickly. Felix was at home, as usual, not caring about the world outside his door. He didn't know Sarah had been in an accident. He didn't know that his wife, the woman who worked tirelessly for their family, was lying in the street, struggling to breathe. It was only when Sarah was rushed to the hospital that he got the call. When Felix arrived at the hospital, he looked at Sarah's crippled body, her legs broken beyond repair. He looked at the doctors, who could only shake their heads. "She's never going to walk again," one of them said quietly. The words hit Sarah like a slap to the face. This was her reality now. The life she had known, working hard, providing for her children, was slipping away from her. But what hurt even more was Felix's reaction. He didn't even seem shocked. He didn't seem to care. The man who had once been the love of her life stood there, arms crossed, looking at her like she was just another problem he didn't want to deal with. "What am I supposed to do now, Sarah?" he asked, his voice cold and indifferent. "You're useless now. I can't even depend on you anymore." Sarah's heart shattered in that moment. He was her husband. He was supposed to care for her, to love her in sickness and health, but all he saw was a burden. She could see it in his eyes, the same eyes that used to look at her with love, now filled with contempt. "I've had enough, Sarah," Felix said, turning away from her. "I can't stay with you now. You're not the woman I married. You've changed. You're just a cripple now." His words cut deeper than any wound. Sarah was numb. She couldn't feel anything anymore, except the weight of his words. He left the hospital room without looking back. Felix, the man who was supposed to love her, had walked away. As the days passed, Sarah's world collapsed. Her body was broken, but her spirit was more shattered by Felix's abandonment. The pain from the accident was nothing compared to the pain of being left by the one person she had trusted most in the world. He had taken everything from her, the love, the hope, and now, he was leaving her with nothing. But this wasn't the end of Sarah's story. She had always been a fighter. And now, more than ever, she had to fight for herself. The world had given up on her, but she wouldn't give up on herself. She would rise again. Days turned into weeks, and the cold hospital room became Sarah's new home. She lay in bed, her legs in casts, her body still recovering from the shock, but it was her heart that was the hardest to heal. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Felix's face, cold and indifferent, walking away without a second thought. The man she had sacrificed everything for, the man who was supposed to be by her side, had left her without a glance back. Her children, little David and little Grace, visited her every day, their innocent eyes full of concern and love. They didn't understand what had happened, only that their mother was hurt and that their father was nowhere to be found. They would sit by her bedside, clutching her hands, telling her how much they loved her. But even their love couldn't fill the empty space Felix had left behind. The ache in her chest grew with every passing day, and the pain in her legs was nothing compared to the emptiness she felt inside. "I miss Daddy," little Grace would say, her small voice tinged with sadness. Sarah would smile weakly and stroke her daughter's hair, but it was hard to hide the tears that threatened to spill. "Daddy will come back, baby. He's just taking some time," Sarah would tell her, though she knew the truth deep down. Felix wasn't coming back. He had made his choice, and it was one that left Sarah utterly alone. Felix's absence wasn't just felt in the silence of their home. It was in the bills piling up, the rent that Sarah couldn't pay, and the children's needs that Sarah couldn't meet. With her legs crippled, she could no longer run her fruit stall, the only source of income for the family. She had no idea how she was going to survive, let alone provide for her children. The thought of how she would survive without Felix's support haunted her every night. One afternoon, as Sarah sat alone in her room, a nurse came in to check on her. "How are you feeling today, Mrs. Sarah?" the nurse asked kindly. But Sarah couldn't answer. She just stared blankly at the window, the world outside moving on as though nothing had happened to her. "It's tough, isn't it?" the nurse said gently, sitting beside her. "But you're a strong woman. You've gotten through worse." Sarah wanted to believe those words, but deep down, she felt weak. She had always been the one to fight, to make sure her family was okay. But now, with everything stripped away from her, she felt like she was falling apart. Her strength seemed to have vanished with Felix's departure. But the nurse's words, though comforting, sparked something deep inside Sarah. The nurse was right. She had been through worse. There had been times in her life when everything seemed lost, but somehow, she found a way to rise. She couldn't let this defeat her. She couldn't let Felix's betrayal be the end of her story. One night, after the children had gone to bed, Sarah made a decision. She would not allow herself to be defined by what Felix had done. She was more than his wife. She was more than her crippled legs. She was a mother, and she had a responsibility to her children. She couldn't let them see her fall apart, not when they needed her the most. The next morning, she began to plan. She couldn't sell fruit anymore, but there had to be another way. She had always been good with her hands. She remembered how she used to make beautiful bead necklaces and bracelets when she was younger. She had once sold them at the market, and they had sold well. Maybe she could do that again, but this time, she would take it online. She would make jewelry, sell it, and use whatever money she could to support her children. She would teach herself everything she needed to know about online businesses, about marketing and selling. She would learn how to make her own website, how to get people to notice her work. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing in her life had ever been easy. She had always worked hard, and she wasn't about to stop now. But as she started to focus on this new plan, the truth of Felix's betrayal hit her again. How could he leave her when she had done everything for him? How could he walk away from a woman who had given him everything? The pain was too much, and for the first time since the accident, Sarah allowed herself to cry. The tears came in waves, hot and uncontrollable. She had kept it all inside for so long, but now in the quiet of the night, she let it all out. She cried for the woman she used to be, the woman who had loved with all her heart. She cried for the family that had been torn apart, for the children who would grow up without their father. But as the tears fell, Sarah realized something. She didn't need Felix. She had thought she needed him to survive, but now she understood that she had the strength to stand on her own. He had walked away, but she had her children, her skills, and her heart. She would rise from this, no matter what. The next morning, Sarah began her new journey. She picked up her phone and started researching everything she needed to know to start her online business. She found tutorials on how to make jewelry, how to take photos that would sell her work, and how to set up a website. It wasn't easy, and she was frustrated at times, but she didn't give up. She couldn't. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah began to see small successes. People bought her jewelry. Her website started getting traffic. And with every sale, Sarah felt a sense of pride she hadn't felt in a long time. She was building something for herself, something that didn't rely on Felix or anyone else. She was finally starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But what she didn't know was that her journey was far from over. Felix's betrayal was just the beginning of a larger story, one that would change her life in ways she could never imagine. But for now, Sarah focused on one thing: survival. And she would do whatever it took to protect her children and herself, even if it meant facing a future alone. Sarah's days became filled with a new rhythm. No longer was she waiting on Felix's promises or hoping for his return. No, her mornings now began with a steady click of her fingers on her phone screen, setting up her online jewelry store. The nights were spent crafting beautiful pieces of jewelry, each bead strung with patience, each design imbued with the hope of a better future. With every bracelet she made, she could almost feel the weight lifting from her heart. She had found a sense of peace in the simplicity of her new life. Every bead she threaded, every stone she polished, felt like a small victory over the pain and loss. It was hard work, but it was hers. And that was all that mattered. Her children, David and Grace, were her motivation. They were the reason she didn't fall apart, the reason she pushed forward, even when her body still ached from the accident. They were the light in her otherwise dark world. They were the ones who needed her to be strong. But life wasn't always kind. One afternoon, as Sarah sat in her makeshift workshop, her small room where she now worked on her jewelry, she heard a knock at the door. Her heart skipped. She wasn't expecting anyone. She opened the door, and there, standing in front of her, was a woman Sarah hadn't seen in months. It was Mrs. Clara, the landlord. Sarah's stomach churned. She had been trying to avoid her, but she knew this day would come. The rent was overdue, and Sarah had no way to pay. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Clara," Sarah greeted her, trying to keep her voice steady. Clara's expression was all business, her lips tight, her eyes cold. "Sarah, it's been a while since the rent was due. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to pay up, or I'll have no choice but to ask you to vacate the property." Sarah's heart sank. She had nothing left to give. She had spent all her savings on her children, on her medical bills, and on starting her new business. There was no money left. Her mind raced, but her voice was calm. "I know, Mrs. Clara. I'm sorry. I've just had a lot going on, but I'll have it as soon as I can. I promise." Mrs. Clara didn't seem convinced. She crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. "I'm afraid promises don't pay the bills, Sarah. You need to make a decision. Either you pay me today, or you and your children will have to find somewhere else to stay." The pressure was too much. Sarah had been doing everything she could to make things work, but every time she thought she had a foothold, life knocked her down again. She could feel the tears threatening to rise, but she held them back, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I'll find a way," she whispered, more to herself than to Mrs. Clara. Clara gave her one last, cold look before turning to leave. "You better. I'll be back tomorrow. Don't make me come back here again." As she watched Mrs. Clara walk away, Sarah felt a wave of panic wash over her. She didn't know how she would pay the rent, let alone make sure her children were fed. She was doing everything she could, but it never felt like enough. The weight of the world felt like it was crushing her. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her mind racing, her heart pounding. What was she going to do? How was she going to keep going when it felt like everything was slipping through her fingers? But then, as if by instinct, she reached for her phone. It had been weeks since she had spoken to Felix, and she didn't even know why she was considering calling him now. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the thought that somehow, he would come to his senses and realize the mess he had left behind. She dialed his number. Her hands shook as the phone rang. "Hello." Felix's voice came through the line, thick with indifference. "Felix," Sarah's voice was soft, her words carrying the weight of everything she had been through. "We need to talk." There was a long pause, and for a moment, Sarah thought he was going to hang up. But then he sighed. "What do you want, Sarah?" I need your help," she said, swallowing her pride. "I need you to help me with the rent. The landlord's threatening to throw us out." Felix didn't answer immediately, and Sarah could hear the faint sound of someone laughing in the background, a woman's voice. The realization hit Sarah like a slap. He was with another woman. He had moved on, while she was still drowning in the consequences of their broken life. "I can't help you, Sarah," Felix finally said. "You should have thought about that before you got yourself in this mess. I'm not responsible for you anymore." The words stung, but Sarah had heard them before. The man who had once promised to care for her in sickness and health, the man who had once vowed to stand by her side, was now just a stranger on the other end of the phone. "I see," Sarah replied, her voice trembling with anger and disbelief. "I guess I'll figure it out myself, just like I always have." She hung up before he could say another word, her chest heaving with the weight of his rejection. Felix had made his choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. But Sarah was done. She was done begging for help from someone who never valued her, who never saw her worth. The pain of Felix's betrayal was still fresh, but it no longer controlled her. She was stronger than this. She would not let him take away her power. With renewed determination, Sarah wiped the tears from her eyes and stood up. She may have lost Felix, but she hadn't lost herself. She had her children. She had her business. And she had a strength that no one, not even Felix, could take away from her. She would fight. For herself. For her children. For her future. The winds of change were blowing, and Sarah was ready to face whatever came her way. The next few days passed in a blur. Sarah had no choice but to focus on her business. The rent was still overdue, and every time she looked at the stack of bills piling up on the table, the pressure felt unbearable. But her children needed her, and she couldn't let them see her crumble. She had to find a way to keep going. Sarah poured her energy into her jewelry business, determined to make it work. She spent hours researching how to market her products, how to take the best pictures for her online store, and how to get noticed in a sea of other small businesses. There were days when she felt exhausted, when the thought of giving up crossed her mind, but she pushed those thoughts aside. She had come too far to turn back now. One evening, after a long day of making and photographing her jewelry, Sarah decided to take a break. She sat down on the couch, letting out a sigh of relief. Her legs still hurt from the accident, but she had learned to live with the constant pain. It was a part of her new reality. As she relaxed, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unfamiliar number. Her heart skipped. Who could it be? "Hello, Sarah. This is Mrs. Clara. I wanted to let you know that I'm willing to give you a little more time to pay the rent. I understand your situation, and I've been thinking about it. I'll give you an extension of 2 weeks. But that's it. After that, I'll have no choice but to evict you." Sarah stared at the message for a moment, disbelief washing over her. Could it be? Mrs. Clara, who had seemed so cold and unforgiving, was giving her another chance? It was the lifeline Sarah needed, but she knew that it wouldn't be easy. She had only 2 weeks to find the money. With renewed determination, Sarah sat up straighter, her mind racing. She had to make the most of this opportunity. She had no choice. She would use every ounce of energy she had to make her business succeed. There was no time to waste. 2 weeks was all she had. The next day, Sarah set out to make her business visible. She posted more pictures of her jewelry, reaching out to friends and family to share her products. She looked up online marketing tips, joined online forums for small business owners, and asked for advice. She was overwhelmed, but she pushed forward. Every sale was a small victory, and it gave her hope that she could make it. But just as Sarah began to see the light at the end of the tunnel, something unexpected happened. She received another message, this time from a number she recognized. It was from Felix. "Sarah," the message started, "I've been thinking about everything that's happened. I know I haven't been the best husband, but I'm sorry for how I treated you. I don't want to be a part of your business, but I want to help you out. I know you're struggling, and I want to contribute. I can send you some money for the rent. Please let me know if you're okay with that." Sarah stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Was this really Felix? After everything he had done, after how he had abandoned her in her time of need, he was now offering to help? The audacity of it made her angry. She had fought so hard to stand on her own, and now he was coming back, trying to play the hero. For a moment, she thought about what to say. She could easily take the money. It would solve her immediate problem. But was that what she wanted? To rely on him again? To let him think that his apology and a few hundred naira could fix everything? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could feel the temptation to say yes, to take the easy way out. But then, as she looked at her children playing in the corner of the room, something shifted inside her. She had come this far on her own. She didn't need Felix. She had learned to survive without him, and she wasn't about to let his apology change that. She typed back a simple response, "Thank you for the offer, Felix. But I'm doing fine. I don't need your help." Sarah hit send, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of power. She had made the right choice. She wasn't going to let Felix define her anymore. She wasn't going to let his guilt or his money control her. She was stronger than that. The days that followed were exhausting but rewarding. Sarah worked tirelessly to grow her business, and slowly but surely, she began to see results. More people were buying her jewelry, and word of mouth spread. She didn't have the luxury of a fast turnaround, but she had something even more important: resilience. 2 weeks later, as the deadline for the rent loomed, Sarah had enough money to pay it. She had worked hard, and it had paid off. The weight of the burden she had carried for so long was lifted. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She had made it on her own. When she handed the money to Mrs. Clara, she couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride. The landlord's eyes widened in surprise. "I didn't expect you to come up with it so quickly. Well done, Sarah." Sarah smiled, the feeling of victory coursing through her. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "I'll make sure this never happens again." As Mrs. Clara walked away, Sarah closed the door and let out a deep breath. She had done it. She had fought for her family, for her future, and for herself. And she had won. That night, as Sarah sat with her children, the weight of the world seemed a little bit lighter. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hope. She had come so far, and there was no turning back now. Sarah knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. She had discovered a strength she never knew she had, and that strength would carry her through whatever came next. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And she was going to make it. The weeks that followed Sarah's victory over the rent felt like a turning point. Each day, as she worked on her jewelry, her confidence grew. She had proven to herself that she could survive without Felix, that she was strong enough to carry her family alone. It wasn't easy, but it was her life now, and she had come to accept that. She was no longer a woman lost in the shadow of her husband's indifference. She was Sarah, strong, capable, and in control. But life had a way of throwing curveballs, and Sarah's life was about to take another unexpected turn. One afternoon, as Sarah sat at her makeshift desk, carefully crafting a new necklace, her phone buzzed again. She picked it up, expecting another customer inquiry or a message from a friend. But when she saw the name on the screen, her heart sank. It was Felix. She hesitated before answering. What could he possibly want now? After everything, after he had abandoned her, why was he reaching out again? Taking a deep breath, Sarah pressed the green button and put the phone to her ear. "Sarah," Felix's voice came through, and for the first time, it sounded different. It wasn't the usual detached tone that Sarah had grown used to, but something softer, more urgent. "What is it, Felix?" Sarah's voice was calm, but inside, she was already preparing herself for whatever he was about to say. She wasn't sure if she could handle more of his back and forth. "I need to talk to you," Felix said, his voice tight. "Can we meet? It's important." Sarah's mind raced. What could be so important? She had already decided that she wasn't going to rely on him again. But there was something in his tone that made her wonder if this time, it might be different. "Why do you want to meet now, Felix?" she asked, trying to keep her emotions in check. "You've made it clear where you stand. What more is there to say?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Felix spoke again, his voice was laced with a strange kind of urgency. I found out something, Sarah. Something that changes everything." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Her mind spun with possibilities, but nothing that Felix could say would shock her. She had already been through the worst. Still, there was something in his tone that made her uneasy. "I don't have time for games, Felix," she replied, her voice steely. "If you're calling to waste my time, then—" "It's not a game," Felix cut in, his voice more desperate now. "Sarah, you've been left out of everything. You have no idea what I've learned. I don't know how to say this, but you're sitting on a gold mine. Your family, you have an inheritance. A huge one. And it's yours." Sarah froze. Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. "Your father's family," Felix continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "They've been trying to contact you for years. You've inherited 500 million naira, Sarah. It's yours. And all this time, you didn't even know." Sarah's mind struggled to catch up with what he was saying. Inheritance? 500 million naira? It didn't make sense. Her father had passed away years ago, but she had never heard anything about an inheritance. There had never been any mention of wealth, of money, or of anything more than what they could scrape by with. "How do you know this?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "What are you talking about?" "I've been going through some old papers, Sarah. Legal papers that were meant for you," Felix explained. "I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. I've been in touch with a lawyer, and he confirmed everything. Your father left behind an estate, and you are the sole beneficiary. It's yours. All of it." Sarah sat down hard, her legs giving out beneath her. The room around her spun as her mind processed the impossible truth. Her family, her humble family, struggling to make ends meet, was now sitting on a fortune. And she had no idea. "You're telling me I'm rich?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Felix's response was slow, deliberate. "Yes. You are. And I'm sorry for everything, Sarah. I should have told you sooner. I should have been there for you. But now that you know, I'm here to help. You don't have to struggle anymore." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. 500 million naira. It sounded too good to be true. It sounded like something out of a fairy tale, something that had no place in her life. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of the words. "But why are you telling me this now, Felix?" she asked, her voice hardening again. "What's your angle? You've never cared about me. You've never cared about our family." Felix paused, and Sarah could hear him exhale on the other end of the line. "Because I made a mistake, Sarah. And I can't undo the things I've done. But I want to help you now. I want to make things right. Let me help you get what's yours. Let me show you the paperwork, the lawyers. We can set everything up together." A cold chill ran through Sarah. She didn't know what to make of it. Her head was spinning, and every part of her wanted to reject Felix's offer. But the truth was undeniable. The money was real. And it was hers. She had never imagined such a turn of events, and yet here she was, on the brink of something that could change her life forever. "Give me the details, Felix," Sarah finally said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotion swirling inside her. "But I need to do this on my own. You've already taken enough from me. I'll handle this." Felix was silent for a moment before he spoke again. "I understand. But I'll be here if you need me." Sarah ended the call, her hand shaking as she placed the phone down. She stared at the screen for a moment, her thoughts racing. She didn't know whether to feel joy, anger, or fear. 500 million naira. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of. It was more than enough to change everything. But was she ready for it? Was she ready for the power and responsibility that came with such wealth? And most importantly, was she ready to trust Felix again, after everything he had put her through? As Sarah sat in the silence of her room, the weight of the truth settled over her. She was standing at a crossroads. She could take the money, let it change her life, and finally put an end to the struggles that had defined her existence. Or she could walk away, leave it all behind, and continue on her path of self-discovery. But one thing was certain, this new chapter in her life was only just beginning. And no matter which choice she made, Sarah knew one thing above all else: she was going to do it on her terms. Sarah couldn't sleep. The weight of Felix's revelation sat heavy on her chest, keeping her awake in the quiet darkness of her room. 500 million naira. The number echoed in her mind, mocking her disbelief. She had always lived with the burden of never having enough, always scrambling to make ends meet, always on the edge of survival. But now the promise of a fortune, of a life she never imagined, was sitting right in front of her. She turned on the bedside lamp, the soft glow casting shadows on the walls. The air felt thick, as if the very room was holding its breath along with her. She reached for her phone again, replaying the conversation with Felix. His words sounded so convincing, so apologetic, but the cynicism in her heart refused to believe him. After all, this was the same man who had abandoned her in her time of need. The same man who had refused to lift a finger to help when she had begged him. But now, he was offering her something unimaginable. Was it genuine? Or was it just another attempt to manipulate her? She placed the phone back on the nightstand and sat up, her hands clenched in her lap. The truth was, she didn't know what to believe anymore. A part of her wanted to dismiss it all. Felix, the inheritance, the money. She didn't need any of it. She had survived without him, and she could continue surviving without the wealth he was offering. But another part of her, the part that had been struggling for so long, couldn't deny the allure of a different life. A life where she didn't have to worry about the next meal, the next rent payment, or whether or not she was going to make it through another day. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft rustle of sheets. David stirred in the bed beside her, his small body shifting under the covers. Sarah smiled softly at her son, whose innocent face still held the remnants of his childhood. He didn't deserve to grow up in poverty. He deserved a life filled with opportunity, with security, with happiness. And Grace, too. They were her world. They were the reason she had fought so hard, and the reason she had to keep going, no matter what. But was Felix's offer the way to make things better for them? The next morning, Sarah went about her usual routine, trying to push away the gnawing uncertainty in her chest. She made breakfast for the children, helped them get ready for school, and cleaned the house. Every task she did felt like a small distraction from the decision she had to make. She couldn't avoid it any longer. The inheritance wasn't going away, and neither was Felix's offer. She decided to visit the lawyer. The lawyer who had supposedly been handling the inheritance for years. She couldn't just take Felix's word for it. She needed to see the proof with her own eyes. She had to know if this was real. If it was, then she would decide what to do with it. But if it was a lie, then she would walk away, no matter how tempting the offer was. After dropping the kids off at school, Sarah took a deep breath and made her way to the lawyer's office. The building was sleek and modern, an intimidating contrast to the humble, worn-down street Sarah had known all her life. She stood outside for a moment, staring at the building's glass doors. Her nerves were on edge, but she was determined. This was her chance to take control of her life. She couldn't afford to be afraid anymore. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The receptionist greeted her warmly and directed her to a large office at the back. Sarah knocked on the door and entered when told to. Inside, a tall man in his late 40s sat behind a polished wooden desk, his glasses perched on the bridge of his nose as he reviewed some papers. He looked up as Sarah walked in, a professional smile spreading across his face. "Ms. Sarah, I presume?" he asked, standing up and extending his hand. "Yes," Sarah replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I'm here about the inheritance. Felix said I had one, but I need to see the documents for myself." The lawyer's smile faltered for a moment, as though he hadn't expected her to ask so directly. "Of course," he said, motioning for her to take a seat. "Please, make yourself comfortable. I'll get everything ready for you." Sarah sat down, her heart pounding in her chest. The air in the room felt thick with anticipation. She had always imagined this moment in her head, the moment she would find out the truth. But now that she was here, now that the possibility of wealth was so close, she wasn't sure how to feel. The lawyer returned with a folder, thick with papers. He set it down on the desk and flipped it open, revealing documents with her father's name on them. Her eyes scanned the papers quickly, and then they stopped. There it was. The official document. The will. It was all true. The inheritance, the estate, everything. Her father had left behind not just property and assets, but a fortune. A fortune she had never known about. It felt like a dream, an impossible dream. But the paper in front of her was real. She felt a rush of emotions, shock, disbelief, and then something that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time, hope. "Ms. Sarah," the lawyer said gently, I understand that this may be overwhelming. But I assure you, the inheritance is legitimate. Your father wanted you to have this, and it's all yours. If you would like, I can help you with the paperwork to claim it officially. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for the document. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she read the legal jargon, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of what she was seeing. But then, something else caught her attention. Felix, she said softly, almost to herself. Where does he come into all this? Why did he even tell me about it? The lawyer shifted in his seat. Well, Felix has been in contact with us. He's been handling some of the estate's preliminary affairs. But the inheritance was always meant for you. It's a substantial amount, and there are conditions tied to it. We will go over those as soon as you're ready. Conditions? Sarah's brow furrowed. What conditions could there possibly be? Before she could ask more, the lawyer's phone rang. He looked at the screen for a moment, his face paling. He sighed heavily and held up a hand to Sarah. I apologize, Ms. Sarah. But I must take this call. It's urgent. Please, feel free to look through the documents further while I'm away. As the lawyer stepped out of the office, Sarah sat back in her chair, staring at the will. Her life was about to change forever, but now there were more questions than answers. What were the conditions attached to the inheritance? And why was Felix involved in all of this? Sarah's mind was spinning, and for the first time since she had received the message, the weight of what was happening hit her. She had a fortune waiting for her, but she wasn't sure who she could trust anymore. As Sarah sat alone in the lawyer's office, the weight of the moment pressed down on her like a physical force. She could hear the muffled sound of the lawyer's voice through the door as he conversed on the phone, but her mind was far from the conversation. Her eyes kept drifting back to the document in front of her. The reality of the situation was too much to absorb all at once. 500 million naira. She kept repeating the figure in her head, but it didn't feel real. It felt like a cruel joke. The air around her seemed thicker now, almost suffocating. Her hands gripped the edge of the table as she tried to make sense of the will in front of her. There was no denying it, her father had left her a fortune. But the way Felix had brought it to her attention, the way he had shown up out of nowhere with an apology and an offer to help, it didn't sit right. There was something off about all of this, and Sarah could feel it in her bones. She turned the pages carefully, searching for answers, for anything that might explain what Felix's role had been in all of this. The lawyer had said that Felix had been handling preliminary affairs, but it didn't make sense. Why hadn't anyone contacted her sooner? Why had Felix kept this from her? She couldn't help but wonder if there was something more to this story, something she wasn't seeing. The lawyer finally returned, his face slightly flushed. He looked at Sarah with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry about the interruption, he said, sitting back down. I'm afraid the matter I was dealing with was urgent. Now, Miss Sarah, as you've seen, the inheritance is indeed yours. But there are some conditions you must meet in order to claim the full estate. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had been so focused on the surprise of the inheritance that she hadn't even thought to ask about any stipulations. She tried to keep her composure as she looked up at the lawyer. What conditions? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. The lawyer cleared his throat and opened a folder in front of him. There are two main conditions. First, you must maintain the estate in its current state for a minimum of 5 years. This means you cannot sell, alter, or make any changes to the property until that time has passed. The second condition is a bit more complicated. It involves the family business, your father's company. To inherit the full amount, you must take control of the business and lead it to profitability within the next year. Sarah blinked in shock. She hadn't even known her father had a business. How could she be expected to take control of something she knew nothing about? The weight of these conditions hit her like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about money. This was about power, responsibility, and she feared, about being dragged into a world she wasn't ready for. You're telling me that in order to claim this inheritance, I need to run my father's company? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. I don't even know anything about it. The lawyer nodded. That's correct. The business is a significant part of the inheritance. It's yours by default, but unless you take control and prove yourself capable of running it, the full estate may be withheld. I understand this is a lot to take in, but we can walk through the details step by step. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She had never considered herself a businesswoman. Her life had been about survival, about getting by day to day. She had never even thought about taking control of something as complex as a company. And now, she was being told that her future, her wealth, depended on it. I don't know if I can do this, she said softly, her voice laced with doubt. How am I supposed to run a company? I've never even worked in a business before. The lawyer looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and understanding. I know this is overwhelming, Ms. Sarah. But you have what it takes. You're already strong. You've already proven that. Running a business is not about having all the answers right away. It's about learning, asking the right questions, and surrounding yourself with the right people. You don't have to do it alone. Sarah's mind was spinning, her thoughts swirling like a storm. She had always been the one to work tirelessly, to put everything she had into providing for her family. But this was different. This was a world of business, of power, of high stakes. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about thriving, about becoming someone with influence and control. Could she really handle that? Could she handle the pressure? Do you have any idea who I can turn to for help? She asked, her voice shaking with uncertainty. The lawyer paused, his fingers tapping against the desk as he thought. There are business advisors who specialize in helping people transition into roles like this. I can provide you with some contacts. You'll need to act quickly though. The company won't wait. But you're not alone in this. You have options. Options. Sarah had options now. She could take control of her life, her future, and her inheritance. But the reality of what it would take to get there was daunting. There was a part of her that wanted to walk away from it all, to tell the lawyer to keep the money, to go back to the simple life she had known. But another part of her, one that had fought so hard for so long, wanted to rise above it, to prove that she was more than just a woman who had been abandoned, more than just a survivor. This was her chance to change everything. But it would come at a price. The lawyer's voice broke through her thoughts. Ms. Sarah, I understand this is a lot to absorb, but the decision is yours. Take the time you need to think about it, but remember, this is an opportunity that many would dream of. Sarah stood up, her legs feeling weaker than ever, but her resolve was stronger than it had been in a long time. She wasn't going to let fear stop her. She wasn't going to let the uncertainty define her. She had been through too much to back down now. I'll think about it, she said, her voice steady. And I'll let you know. The lawyer nodded and handed her a few documents to review. As Sarah left the office, she felt the weight of the decision still hanging over her. But there was one thing she knew for sure, this was her moment. She had the power to choose, and no one was going to take that from her. As she stepped outside into the bright afternoon sun, Sarah felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in years, hope. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she believed that she could shape it. The following days were a whirlwind. Sarah couldn't shake the weight of the decision that lay before her. The inheritance, the business, the future, everything was resting in her hands, and it felt both overwhelming and exhilarating. She had spent years fighting to survive, to provide for her children, to make sure they had a roof over their heads and food in their bellies. But now, she was being offered something far beyond survival. She was being offered the chance to step into a world of power and influence. A world she had never dreamed of, but now, she had to decide if she could thrive in it. Her phone buzzed on the table, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from the lawyer. Ms. Sarah, I've arranged a meeting with one of the top business advisors. He can help you navigate the next steps for claiming your inheritance and managing the company. The meeting is tomorrow at 10 a.m. Please let me know if you're available. Sarah stared at the message, her stomach tightening. A business advisor. This was real. She wasn't just dreaming, she was actually on the verge of something big. But as much as she tried to push away the excitement, fear crept in. Could she handle it? Could she really take on such a responsibility? And what about her children? Was she prepared to give them the life they deserved, or would this inheritance pull her away from the simple life she had fought so hard to maintain? The following morning, Sarah dressed carefully. She hadn't dressed in anything other than simple clothes for a long time, but today was different. She put on a black dress, modest yet elegant, with a simple pair of flats. She didn't want to appear out of place, but she didn't want to hide her potential either. Today, she would show the world that she was more than just a street vendor, more than just a woman struggling to make ends meet. She was Sarah, strong, capable, and ready for what was next. As she arrived at the office building, her heart raced. The building was tall, sleek, and intimidating. Everything about it screamed success, success that Sarah wasn't sure she could ever achieve. She walked up to the front desk, her hands clammy, and the receptionist directed her to the elevator. She took a deep breath as the doors closed behind her. The elevator ride felt like an eternity, each floor ticking by in slow motion. When the doors finally opened, Sarah stepped into a glass-walled conference room. There waiting for her was the business advisor. He was an older man, maybe in his mid-50s, dressed in a sharp suit, with graying hair and an air of authority. He stood up as she entered, his expression professional but not unkind. "Ms. Sarah, I presume," he said, extending his hand. Sarah shook his hand firmly, trying to ignore the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Yes. Thank you for meeting with me." The advisor motioned for her to sit down. "I'm glad you could make it. Let's dive right in. I've reviewed the details of your inheritance, and it's an impressive estate, not just in terms of value, but potential. But to take full control, you'll need to be ready to make some tough decisions. This is a significant responsibility." Sarah sat down, her back straight, trying to mask the unease she felt. She had spent so many years focused on surviving that the idea of truly thriving seemed foreign. She had never thought about running a business. She had never thought about owning a company. But now, it was all on the table, and there was no turning back. "I understand," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I'm ready to learn. I want to make sure I do this right. For my family." The advisor gave a small nod, his face softening for a moment. "That's the right mindset. The business you're inheriting isn't just a company. It's a legacy. Your father built it with blood, sweat, and tears. But it's fallen on hard times. You'll need to stabilize it, build a team, and streamline operations. But most importantly, you'll need to learn to lead." Sarah absorbed his words, nodding slowly. It all sounded so complicated, so far from the simple life she had known. But then she thought about her children. She thought about their future. And for the first time, she realized that this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about them too. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes," Sarah said, her voice firmer now. "But what if I fail? What if I don't know what I'm doing?" The advisor looked at her, his eyes sharp. "Failure is a part of success, Ms. Sarah. You can't succeed without stumbling a few times. But the key is to learn from those mistakes, to grow. And you don't have to do it alone. You need a strong team. You need people who can guide you, who can help you navigate this world." Sarah's thoughts began to race. A team. She had never thought about it like that. She had always done everything herself, carrying the weight of her family's survival alone. But now, she had to think bigger. She had to think about building something that could support her, her children, and their future. The advisor continued, "I suggest we start by restructuring the company's leadership, streamlining your assets, and setting up meetings with investors. But you'll need to make some difficult choices. There are people within the company who won't like the changes you'll make. They'll resist, maybe even try to undermine you. But you must stand firm. This is your inheritance, and you need to take charge." His words hit her hard. People would resist. She had heard that before, but never in the context of running a business. She had always been on the outside, the one who worked tirelessly without ever stepping into a world of power. But now, the tables were turning. She was the one in charge. She would have to learn to fight for her place, to prove herself worthy of the legacy she had inherited. "I'll do what needs to be done," Sarah said, the weight of the responsibility beginning to settle in her bones. "But I won't forget who I am, where I came from. I'm not just a businesswoman. I'm a mother. And I'm doing this for them." The advisor nodded, impressed by her resolve. "That's the spirit. You have a good head on your shoulders, Sarah. I think you'll do just fine. But remember, this isn't just about the money. It's about building something lasting. Something that will provide for your family for generations to come." As the meeting came to a close, Sarah felt a sense of purpose that she hadn't felt before. She was scared, no doubt about it. But she wasn't going to let that fear control her. She had always been a survivor, And now, she had the chance to thrive. She had the power to build her future, to take control of her life, and to create something meaningful for her children. The road ahead would be difficult, and Sarah knew it. But she was no longer afraid of the challenges. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to stop now. She left the meeting that day with a renewed sense of determination. The world was waiting for her to rise, and she was ready. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. And nothing was going to stop her from claiming her place at the top. The following weeks were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and meetings. Sarah dove headfirst into the world of business with the same determination that had carried her through the hardest moments of her life. But this was different. This wasn't about fruit stalls or making enough to feed her children. This was about something bigger, something she could build from the ground up. She started meeting with the company's senior staff. Some of them were polite, respectful even, while others looked at her with skepticism, as if they doubted whether she had the ability to lead. She could see the judgment in their eyes, feel the coldness in their tone. They saw her as nothing more than a woman, a mother, someone who had no business in a boardroom. But Sarah was done playing small. She wasn't here to prove herself to anyone, she was here to take charge. She had a responsibility to her children and to herself. This wasn't just about money. It was about her future, and the future of her family. One afternoon, she called a meeting with the company's department heads. The conference room was quiet as the staff filed in, each person taking their seat. Sarah could feel their eyes on her, sizing her up. She sat at the head of the table, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her posture straight. She had learned from the business advisor that confidence was key. She had to show them that she wasn't intimidated by their years of experience. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah began, her voice calm but firm. "As you know, I am now the head of this company. I may not have experience in business, but I have something far more important, a deep desire to see this company succeed. And I will do whatever it takes to make that happen." The room was silent. Sarah could feel the weight of their expectations, the tension thick in the air. She continued, not letting the silence shake her. "I've gone through the books. I've seen where we've failed, and I've seen where we can improve. We need to restructure, streamline our processes, and invest in the future. There will be changes, and some of you may not like them. But they are necessary." The department heads exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. Sarah knew they were talking behind her back, questioning her qualifications, doubting her ability to lead. But she couldn't afford to be weak. She had to keep pushing, keep demanding more from them and from herself. "I've already made the decision to invest in new marketing strategies, and we're going to be more aggressive with our outreach. We will focus on innovation, not just maintenance. If we're going to survive, we need to evolve," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I'll be expecting your full cooperation. I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to ensure this company thrives. If you can't handle that, then you might need to find another place to work." There were murmurs of dissent, but Sarah didn't flinch. She held her ground, her eyes scanning the room, watching each person carefully. She could feel the tension in the room, but she refused to back down. "I expect full reports on our progress. Every quarter, I want to know where we stand. I want transparency and honesty. If something isn't working, I want to know about it, and I want it fixed." The room fell silent again, and Sarah could see the staff processing her words. Some were nodding, others were glaring, but it didn't matter. Sarah had planted the seed of change, and she wasn't going to let anyone stand in her way. After the meeting, Sarah walked back to her office, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew the road ahead would be difficult. There would be resistance, there would be mistakes, and there would be setbacks. But she couldn't afford to be afraid anymore. This was her company now. This was her legacy. As Sarah settled into her office chair, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see one of the senior managers, a tall man named Mr. Olamide, standing in the doorway. He was one of the few who had shown respect during the meeting, but Sarah could tell there was more to his visit than just a polite exchange. "Ms. Sarah, if I could have a moment of your time," he said, stepping inside. "Of course, Mr. Olamide. Please, take a seat." He sat down across from her, his hands clasped together. Sarah could tell he was uncomfortable, but she wasn't sure why. Was he here to challenge her decisions? Was he going to try and undermine her? I wanted to talk to you about your plans, Mr. Olamide began, his voice measured. I've been with this company for over 10 years, and I've seen a lot of changes. Some of them have worked, and some haven't. But what you're proposing, well, it's a big shift. It's risky. Sarah leaned forward, meeting his gaze. I know it's risky. But if we don't take risks, we'll be left behind. We can't afford to stay stagnant. We need to push forward. I agree, he said slowly. But I wanted to make sure you understand what you're up against. There are some people in the company who aren't going to be happy with these changes. They may even resist them. They have power, influence. They've been here for a long time. Sarah nodded, understanding what he was saying. I'm prepared for that. I expect resistance, but I'm not going to let it stop me. If the company is going to survive, we all need to be on the same page. There's no room for egos anymore. Mr. Olamide leaned back in his chair, studying her closely. I respect your confidence, Sarah. And I think you're right to make these changes. But I wanted to give you a heads up about something else. There's a group of senior executives who've been holding on to some of the power behind the scenes. They've been operating in ways that could harm the company if they're not kept in check. I'm telling you this because I want to help you, but you need to be aware of who you're up against. The room suddenly felt colder, and Sarah's stomach tightened. There were more forces at play than she had realized. Power struggles, hidden agendas. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about control. Thank you for letting me know, Sarah said, her voice calm, though inside, her mind was racing. I'll be watching closely. As Mr. Olamide stood to leave, he paused at the door and turned back to her. I'm with you, Sarah. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. Thank you, she replied, her voice steady. I'll remember that. After he left, Sarah sat back in her chair, her mind spinning. This wasn't just a company to run. This was a battleground. People would try to manipulate her, to take advantage of her inexperience. But she wouldn't let them. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to back down now. She looked out the window, the city below bustling with life. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt ready. Ready to fight. Ready to lead. And no one was going to take this from her. Sarah's first few weeks at the helm of the company were filled with intense meetings, endless reports, and a flood of decisions that seemed to come from every direction. She worked harder than ever before, juggling her new role as a CEO with the responsibilities of being a mother. Every evening, after her children were tucked into bed, she would sit up late, reading through contracts, emails, and financial reports, all while trying to make sense of the world she had just stepped into. But as the days turned into weeks, Sarah began to feel the weight of the decisions she was making. She was learning quickly, but it was never fast enough. The company's senior staff, though polite in person, were beginning to show their true colors. They didn't take her seriously. They whispered behind her back, undermined her ideas, and ignored her instructions. And she knew it. It wasn't just the employees, either. The deeper she delved into the company's finances and operations, the more she uncovered about the tangled web of lies and secrets that had been festering beneath the surface for years. The business was in worse shape than she had been led to believe. There were accounts missing, investments that had gone sour, and a whole division that had been mismanaged for years. One afternoon, Sarah sat in the boardroom, going through the latest set of reports with Mr. Olamide. He had been one of the few people to consistently offer support since she took over, but even he seemed uncomfortable with some of the things they were uncovering. Ms. Sarah, Mr. Olamide said, his tone cautious. There's something you need to see. It's regarding the company's financials. Some of the funds have been misappropriated. Sarah's stomach dropped. Misappropriated? How much are we talking about? Mr. Olamide didn't meet her eyes as he slid a file across the table toward her. Sarah opened it, scanning the documents quickly. Her heart raced as she saw the figures in front of her. Hundreds of millions of naira had been siphoned off over the years, hidden in offshore accounts and fake contracts. The more she read, the more her anger grew. The betrayal was deeper than she had imagined. She had walked into a lion's den, unaware of the extent of the damage. This is a disaster, Sarah muttered, her hand shaking as she set the file down. How did this happen? Who's responsible for this? I've been looking into it, Mr. Olamide said, his voice low. It seems like a small group of executives were involved. They've been skimming off the top for years. They thought they could hide it forever, but now that you've stepped in, it's all coming to light. Sarah clenched her fists. And these people are still here? They're still working in this company. Yes, Mr. Olamide said. They're still here, and some of them have a lot of influence. They won't go down without a fight. Sarah stood up, pacing the room as the weight of the situation hit her. I can't let this go on any longer. We have to act. We need to fire them, immediately. Mr. Olamide nodded, but his expression was troubled. I agree. But it's not going to be that simple. These people are well connected. They have ties to investors, to other businesses. They won't go quietly. If we move against them, it could cause a scandal. It could bring down the entire company. Sarah's mind raced as she processed his words. A scandal. She had come too far, fought too hard to let everything collapse now. But she couldn't just sit back and let the corruption continue. This was her company now, and if she was going to lead it, she needed to make the tough choices. I don't care about the scandal, she said firmly, looking him in the eye. What I care about is fixing this. I'm not running a company built on lies. If I have to burn bridges, then I will. But I'm not letting this go on for one more day. Mr. Olamide nodded, clearly impressed by her resolve. I'll support you, Ms. Sarah. We'll clean this up together. But you'll need to be prepared. They won't go down without a fight. And there's one other thing. Sarah looked at him, her brow furrowed. What is it? Felix, Mr. Olamide said softly. He's been talking to some of these executives. They're still in contact with him, and it seems he's been feeding them information. He's not just apologizing for his past mistakes, he's positioning himself to regain control of the company. Sarah's stomach tightened. She had suspected as much. Felix had always been selfish, always driven by his own agenda. But she hadn't expected him to go so far as to work behind her back, especially with the same people who had been undermining her. I knew it, Sarah muttered, her fists tightening. Felix hasn't changed. He's using me to get back what he thinks is his. I won't let him win. I won't let him ruin this. Mr. Olamide gave her a grave look. We need to be strategic about this, Sarah. If you confront him directly, it might make things worse. You need to stay calm, stay focused. We'll find a way to expose him without giving him the upper hand. Sarah nodded, her mind working through the possibilities. She had to protect everything she had built, everything she was building. Her future, her children's future, depended on it. But she wasn't just fighting for the company anymore. She was fighting for her dignity, her strength, and her place in this world. Later that day, Sarah called another meeting. This time, it was with a core team of executives, those she could trust. As they gathered around the table, Sarah stood at the front, her heart pounding but her voice steady. We have a problem, she began. There's corruption within the company, and it's time we deal with it. I won't let anyone sabotage what we've worked so hard to rebuild. I want all of you to be honest with me. Who is involved, and who can we count on to make this right? The room was tense, but Sarah's eyes scanned the faces of the people sitting around her. She could feel the loyalty of those who had supported her from the beginning. But she could also feel the weight of the ones who were still hesitant. She knew there were rats in the room, people who had their own agendas. But she wasn't going to let them win. As the meeting continued, Sarah made it clear that the company would not be intimidated by anyone. Not by Felix, not by the corrupt executives, and certainly not by anyone who tried to undermine her. It was time for a reckoning. And she was ready to fight for the future she had started to build. That night, as Sarah sat alone in her office, she stared out the window at the city below. The lights twinkled like stars, and for the first time since taking control of the company, she felt the weight of her power. She was no longer just a woman struggling to survive. She was a leader, a force to be reckoned with. And no one, not even Felix, was going to take that away from her. The following week was a whirlwind of strategy, careful planning, and silent battles. Sarah had made the decision to confront the corruption within the company head-on. She couldn't afford to wait for things to calm down, or for anyone to come to their senses. The company needed a leader who wasn't afraid to make difficult decisions, and Sarah had never been afraid of hard choices. She spent long hours in her office, surrounded by legal documents, business reports, and the faces of the executives she had started to trust. The pressure was suffocating, but she refused to back down. Every day, she was growing stronger. She was learning things about the business world she had never known, discovering sides of herself she had never seen. But with every step forward, the path seemed more treacherous. The company's internal structure was more fragile than Sarah had realized. The corruption ran deeper than just a few bad apples. It was an entire network of people who had been working together for years to embezzle funds, manipulate investors, and undermine the leadership. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. And now, the battle was personal. Sarah had gathered a team of trusted allies, those she could count on. Mr. Olamide was by her side, but there were others as well, a few key executives who had grown disillusioned with the old regime and were ready to help her fight for the company's future. Together, they worked late into the night, plotting how to expose the corrupt figures in the company without tipping them off. But as Sarah focused on cleaning up the company, Felix lurked in the background, like a shadow she couldn't escape. He had begun to contact some of the more senior executives again, trying to worm his way back into the company's good graces. Sarah could feel it. He was setting the stage for his return, ready to take back what he thought was his. The thought of Felix stirred something in Sarah. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was a deep, simmering need for revenge. He had taken everything from her. He had broken her spirit, discarded her when she was most vulnerable, and now he thought he could waltz back into her life, back into the company, and take what he wanted without any consequences. She wasn't going to let that happen. Not now, not ever. One afternoon, Sarah called a private meeting with Mr. Olamide. They had been working closely together, and his loyalty had become an invaluable asset. She trusted him, but the stakes were higher than ever. It was time to take action. Mr. Olamide, I need your help with something more personal, Sarah said, her voice steady. I want to get Felix out of the picture, completely. Olamide looked at her, his brow furrowed. I've been expecting you to ask me for help with this. But it's not going to be easy. Felix still has connections. He's not going to let this go without a fight. Sarah leaned forward, her expression hardening. I don't care about his connections. I care about making sure he never threatens my family again. I've had enough of him manipulating me. He's used me and betrayed me. And I'm done. He won't get away with it. Not this time. Olamide nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. I'll help you, Sarah. But you need to be prepared. This is going to be a fight. Felix won't back down without pulling every trick in the book. I'm ready, she said, her voice unwavering. We need to take control before he can make his move. I'm not going to wait around for him to destroy what I've worked for. He won't get away with it. Over the next few days, Sarah and Olamide set the plan in motion. They began gathering evidence, using legal channels and the company's internal resources to track Felix's movements. They also began to leak information to the press, carefully orchestrating a campaign to expose the corruption in the company without directly implicating Sarah. She couldn't afford to be seen as the villain in this story. She had to be the hero. But as the pieces started to fall into place, Sarah realized that this wasn't just about business anymore. It was about power, control, and justice. Felix had to be stopped, and it was going to take everything Sarah had to do it. One evening, as Sarah sat in her office reviewing the final details of the plan, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from Felix. I've been thinking a lot about everything, Sarah. I'm sorry for what happened. I want to come by and talk things through. I think we can work together. Let's fix this. Let's fix us. Sarah stared at the message, her heart pounding. It took everything she had to resist the urge to respond with something sharp and vindictive. But she had come this far. She had built something for herself, and she wasn't going to let him ruin it again. She took a deep breath and typed back a response. I don't need you anymore, Felix. You lost that right a long time ago. Stay away from me and my business. She hit send, her fingers trembling slightly. The moment she let go of her phone, a strange feeling of relief washed over her. She had made the right choice. She wasn't going to let him back into her life. She had done this on her own, and she was stronger for it. Later that night, as Sarah lay in bed, she thought about everything that had happened. Her father's inheritance, Felix's betrayal, the company, and the future that now lay before her. She had been tested in ways she never expected, and she had come out on the other side stronger, more determined. But the battle wasn't over yet. There was still so much to do. The next day, Sarah received a phone call from the lawyer. He had some good news. The evidence they had gathered was enough to push Felix out of the company for good. They had the legal grounds to sever all ties with him, and there was no way he could come back. The fight was almost over. As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt a mix of emotions. Relief. Triumph. But also, a deep sense of finality. She had won. But the price had been high. She had lost something in the process, something she wasn't sure she could ever get back. Trust. Innocence. The belief that people could change. But as Sarah stood at the window, looking out over the city, she realized one thing: she had made it. She had fought for what was hers, and she had won. The future was hers to shape. And nothing, not even Felix, could take that away. Sarah stood at the head of the company's boardroom, her eyes scanning the faces of the executives who had once doubted her. The last several weeks had been a blur of legal battles, internal restructuring, and the silent battle to solidify her place as the leader of this company. But now, everything had come to a head. She had fought her way to the top, and now it was time to secure her victory. Felix had been officially removed from the company. The legal documents had been signed, the contracts had been nullified, and all the ties that had once bound him to the business were severed. It had taken time, strategy, and a lot of legal maneuvering, but in the end, Felix was out of the picture. The company was finally hers, no longer tainted by his presence, his manipulation, or his betrayal. But there was still one thing Sarah needed to do. She had to prove that she could lead this company into the future, that she could rebuild it into something strong and sustainable. She had to take control completely. As the meeting began, Sarah took a deep breath, her resolve solidifying. The room was filled with tense, expectant silence. She had seen the way some of these people looked at her in the past, doubtful, condescending. But today, she wasn't the woman who had once begged her husband for help. She wasn't the woman who had struggled to make ends meet. She was the woman in charge. "I want to start by saying thank you," Sarah said, her voice steady and firm. "Thank you for your patience, for your support, and for believing in the future of this company. Today marks the beginning of something new. We've faced challenges, but now it's time to rise. We will move forward, together." She could see the uncertainty in some faces, but there was something else there, too: respect. They were starting to see her for who she was now, the woman who had taken control, who had turned a crisis into an opportunity. "I've spent the last few weeks learning everything I can," Sarah continued, "and I'm ready to make the tough decisions. We have the power to change this company, to rebuild it, and to make it stronger than ever. We will focus on innovation, on expansion, and on empowering the next generation of leaders within our company. But we can't do it by holding on to the past." There were murmurs of agreement, and for the first time, Sarah felt the weight of leadership truly settle on her shoulders. It wasn't just about the money, the company, or the inheritance. It was about her own growth. It was about proving that she could rise above everything that had held her back for so long. By the end of the meeting, the executives were on board with her vision. They had seen her strength, her determination, and her clarity. They understood now that she wasn't just playing a game. She was here to stay. As Sarah walked out of the boardroom, she allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. She had done it. She had built this, piece by piece. She had fought for her family, for herself, and for the legacy she was now shaping. There would be more battles ahead, no doubt. But for the first time in her life, Sarah felt like she was truly in control of her destiny. Conclusion: a future reclaimed. In the months that followed, Sarah continued to build her empire, one decision at a time. The company, once on the brink of collapse, was now thriving. It was no longer a symbol of failure and corruption. It was a beacon of possibility, a testament to the strength of its leader. And it was only the beginning. Sarah's children, David and Grace, flourished in the new environment. They could see the pride in their mother's eyes, the confidence in her step. They no longer had to live in fear of the next rent payment or the next crisis. Their mother had made sure of that. She had built something solid, something that would provide for them for generations to come. Felix, on the other hand, faded into the past. His attempts to regain control of the company were met with resistance at every turn. Sarah had cut all ties with him, and he had no place in her life anymore. She had learned that some people were meant to be left behind. And some things were never worth fighting for. As for Sarah, she never forgot where she came from. The street vendor selling fruit, the woman who had once been overlooked and underestimated, she was still that person, in many ways. But now, she had a new identity. She was a leader. A woman who had fought for her place in a world that didn't always make room for her. And no matter what came next, she was ready. Sarah knew that life would continue to present challenges. But she had learned something invaluable over the course of this journey. True strength comes not from what you have, but from what you are willing to overcome. She had conquered her fears, faced betrayal head-on, and taken control of her future. And with her children by her side, Sarah knew there was no limit to what they could achieve together. The future, at last, was hers to shape. And she would not let anyone, not even her past, stand in her way. The end of one chapter had come, but a whole new world was just beginning. And Sarah was ready to write it, one victory at a time.